The last Viking king, Harald Hardrada. He came to conquer England. Then one arrow ended the Viking Age.
On the unusually hot afternoon of September 25, 1066, a towering Norwegian king stood at Stamford Bridge in Yorkshire, England, watching an English army advance. Anticipating an easy surrender from local nobles, the Norwegians had left their heavy chainmail armor behind on their ships, nearly 15 miles away. Caught completely off guard by the rapid forced march of the English king Harold Godwinson, the invaders were forced to fight in only their tunics. In the ensuing bloodbath, an arrow struck the Norwegian king directly in the windpipe, killing him instantly. This sudden, violent death did more than end a single ambitious campaign. It extinguished the life of a man who had fought his way from the frozen fjords of Scandinavia to the blistering deserts of the Middle East, and it traditionally marked the definitive end of the 3-century-long Viking Age. Harald Sigurdsson, widely known by his Old Norse epithet Hardrada, translating to hard ruler, stern counsel, or ruthless, was born in Ringerike, Norway, around 1015 and died on September 25, 1066. He was a statesman, military commander, and the king of Norway from 1046 to 1066. Culturally and politically, he embodied the quintessential Norse warlord, yet his professional military career extended deeply into the Byzantine Empire and Kievan Rus. Operating primarily in the fields of military conquest and national politics, Harald is considered highly influential because his life represents the apex of Norse mercenary expansion and the violent transition of Northern Europe from fragmented Viking chiefdoms into centralized medieval kingdoms. Harald was born roughly in 1015 into a volatile and shifting Scandinavian political landscape. He was the son of Sigurd Sur, a wealthy chieftain in the Ringerike region of Norway, and Ester Gudbrandsdatter. Crucially, through his mother, he was the younger half-brother of King Olaf II of Norway, who would later be canonized as Saint Olaf. The social environment of early 11th century Norway was defined by brutal power struggles among regional chieftains, Danish overlords, and emerging Christian kings. In 1028, Olaf II was overthrown by a rebellion backed by King Knut the Great of Denmark and England. When Olaf returned in 1030 to reclaim his throne, the 15-year-old Harald joined him. At the Battle of Stiklestad on July 29, 1030, the brothers were defeated by an alliance of Norwegian farmers and Danish loyalists. Olaf was killed, and a badly wounded Harald was forced to flee, beginning a life of prolonged exile. Fleeing the disaster at Stiklestad, Harald sneaked across the mountains into Sweden before travelling east to Kievan Rus in 1031. There, he entered the service of Grand Prince Yaroslav the Wise, a distant relative by marriage who had previously sheltered Olaf. For roughly 3 years, Harald operated within Yaroslav's military retinue, fighting campaigns against the Poles, the Tudes, and nomadic steppe tribes. This environment was highly formative. Away from the tribal politics of Norway, Harald was exposed to the centralized autocratic administration of the Rus and the vast wealth of the eastern trade routes. Furthermore, he recognized that a dispossessed prince needed a loyal, professional military force and immense wealth to reclaim a throne. Realizing he could advance no further in Kiev, Harald gathered a retinue of roughly 500 loyal warriors in 1034 and journeyed south to Constantinople, the wealthiest city in the Christian world. Upon arriving in Constantinople, Harald and his 500 followers joined the Varangian Guard, the elite, axe-wielding bodyguard of the Byzantine emperor. Harald's rise through the Byzantine military ranks was spectacular. He proved to be a brilliant tactician, serving under the famed Byzantine general George Maniakes. Between 1038 and 1040, Harald fought in a major campaign to reclaim Sicily from Arab emirs, and later saw action in southern Italy and Bulgaria, earning the moniker Bulgar Burner. According to the 13th century Icelandic historian Snorri Sturluson, Harald captured as many as 80 Arab strongholds in the Mediterranean and North Africa, though modern historians consider this number an exaggeration of his undoubtedly extensive combat record. He was eventually promoted to a Kolathos, commander of the guard. Crucially, he accumulated staggering personal wealth during this time, partly through the traditional right of the guard to plunder the imperial treasury upon an emperor's death. The decisive turning point in Harald's life occurred in 1042. Following the death of Emperor Michael IV, a succession crisis engulfed Constantinople. Harald and his Varangians became embroiled in the violent political coup against the new emperor, Michael V. Contemporary Byzantine sources and later Norse sagas state that Harald personally participated in the blinding and exile of Michael V. Sensing the shifting political tides and facing allegations of embezzling imperial funds, Harald requested permission to leave the empire. When refused, he and his loyalists commandeered ships and escaped into the Black Sea in 1043. He returned to Kiev and Rus, where he married Yaroslav's daughter, Elizabeth, in the winter of 1043-1044. By 1045, Harald returned to Scandinavia not as a destitute exile, but as a seasoned, internationally recognized commander, possessing a vast fortune of Byzantine gold, fundamentally altering the power dynamics of Northern Europe. Returning to Scandinavia in 1045, Harald used his immense wealth to leverage power. He allied with Sweyn Estridsson, a claimant to the Danish throne, to pressure his own nephew, Magnus the Good, who then ruled both Norway and Denmark. To avoid a catastrophic civil war, Magnus agreed in 1046 to share the Norwegian throne in exchange for half of Harald's Byzantine treasure. When Magnus died just 1 year later, in 1047, Harald became the sole king of Norway. For the next 15 years, Harald waged a relentless war of attrition against Sweyn Estridsson to claim the Danish throne. This included the devastating burning of the great Danish trade centre of Hedeby in 1050. The climax of this conflict came on August 9, 1062, at the Battle of Nisa, where Harald's fleet of roughly 150 ships decisively defeated Sweyn's fleet of 300 ships. Despite the tactical victory, Harald could not conquer Denmark, leading to a peace treaty in 1064. His most globally impactful action occurred in 1066. Claiming a disputed right to the English throne following the death of Edward the Confessor, Harald launched a massive invasion of England. Arriving with a fleet of roughly 300 ships and between 10,000 and 15,000 warriors, he won a crushing victory at the Battle of Fulford on September 20, 1066. Just 5 days later, however, his army was surprised and annihilated at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, ending his life and his campaign. Harald is most famous for being the last great Viking, a title earned through his astonishing geographic reach and martial prowess. While most Norse kings fought localized wars in Scandinavia or the British Isles, Harald's career spanned the known world, from the rivers of Russia to Jerusalem, Sicily, and finally England. Society and history paid attention to him because he represented the ultimate archetype of the Norse mercenary king, a man who left home with nothing, manipulated the complex politics of the Mediterranean's greatest empire, and returned to buy a kingdom. Furthermore, his name became immortalized beyond Norway because his 1066 invasion of England inadvertently shaped world history. By forcing the English army to march north and exhaust itself fighting Harald, he paved the way for William the Conqueror to successfully invade southern England just weeks later. Harald was motivated by an unyielding desire for power, driven by a pragmatic, ruthless intelligence. He was not a blindly raging berserker, but a calculating tactician who valued discipline and military engineering. He was notoriously severe, hence the nickname Hardrada. When facing domestic opposition, he did not hesitate to employ brutal violence to enforce his will. Despite his harshness, he possessed a refined cultural intellect. Harald was a skilled skald, Norse poet, and 16 stanzas of his poetry survive today, detailing his military exploits and his longing for his Russian wife. Snorri Sturluson described Harald as remarkably tall, claiming he stood 5 ells, roughly 7 feet tall, a literary exaggeration that nevertheless reflects his imposing physical presence and intimidating leadership style. He valued absolute loyalty and rewarded it richly, operating his kingdom much like he operated his mercenary company in Byzantium. Harald's reign was plagued by failures and fierce criticism. His 15-year war against Denmark was ultimately a failure of grand strategy. Despite winning major battles, he exhausted Norwegian resources and failed to acquire a single inch of Danish territory. Domestically, his rule was highly controversial. When the farmers of the upland region in Norway resisted his heavy taxation, Harald responded with a campaign of terror, burning farms, mutilating dissenters, and confiscating ancestral lands. Snorri's saga notes that many Norwegians viewed him as a tyrant obsessed with wealth. Furthermore, his final campaign in England demonstrated a fatal overconfidence. The decision to leave his army's armor at the ships on September 25, 1066, driven by a false sense of security and a desire for comfort in the heat, is widely judged by military historians as a catastrophic blunder that directly caused his death and the destruction of his army. Harald's short-term impact was heavily centralized in the creation of a strong Norwegian state. He violently broke the power of local chieftains, consolidating royal authority and laying the groundwork for a unified Norwegian administration. Economically, he modernized his realm by introducing a national currency. He is credited with minting the first widely circulated Norwegian coins, an administrative concept he likely absorbed in the Byzantine Empire. He is also traditionally credited with founding the city of Oslo around 1048, which remains Norway's capital today, though modern archaeological discoveries suggest earlier settlements existed there. His long-term global impact, however, lies in the realm of war and geopolitics. By invading England in 1066, Harald directly altered the fate of the British Isles. Though he lost at Stamford Bridge, the heavy casualties he inflicted on King Harold Godwinson's forces left the English vulnerable. When the English army rushed south 19 days later to fight the invading Normans at the Battle of Hastings on October 14, 1066, they were battered and exhausted. Therefore, Harold's failure in England directly contributed to the success of the Norman conquest, an event that reshaped the English language, lore, and culture forever. Today, Harald Hardrada is universally remembered as a transitional figure who stood at the threshold of 2 historical eras. In academic and popular history, he is viewed as the last great monarch to launch a true Viking invasion. His legacy was heavily shaped by Snorri Sturluson's Heimskringla, written in 1225, roughly 160 years after Harald's death. While modern historians debate the exact numbers and specific dialogues presented in the sagas, Snorri successfully cemented Harald's image as a legendary, larger-than-life warrior. In modern culture, Harald's legacy persists in literature, documentaries, and historical strategy games, where he is frequently depicted as the ultimate symbol of Norse martial ambition. A monument stands today at Stamford Bridge, memorializing the site where the great Northern King finally fell. The life of Harald Hardrada serves as a profound case study in the limits and reach of human ambition. He was a man forced into exile as a teenager, who utilized the sprawling trade routes and geopolitical conflicts of the 11th century to build a personal empire of wealth and reputation. His journey from a defeated boy at Stiklestad to an elite commander in Constantinople, and finally to a fiercely dominant king in Norway, highlights the interconnected nature of the medieval world. Yet his violent end at Stamford Bridge reveals the inherent fragility of power built solely on the edge of a sword. Ultimately, Harald Hardrada was a man whose life brilliantly illuminated the closing days of the Viking Age, dying just as the medieval world he helped forge began to emerge.